In this video, we're going to see the stir method in action, and I'm going to show you how we can invoke the stir method in a class, even if it doesn't define it. Now, the idea of magic methods is a new concept. I'm going to have to explain that as well. But I'm going to create a new class right now, and I'm just going to give it a string comment to show that there's really nothing in the class. Now, I can actually create a member of the class, an instance of the class, and see that it's a do object, etc. But what I want to do is see what happens if I call a method that doesn't exist on it. See what I get. Okay, interesting. So I'm calling a method on this object that isn't defined for this class. How can I do that? And what is this stir method? Well, first off, I'll let you know that a stir method is designed to show what the object looks like to a human. I'll give you an example. If I were to create a list object, and then I were to do here, why don't I make it look a little funky to show you what Python's doing for us. I have a nice list here. It works. The extra spaces in there don't matter to Python. And if I want, I could call the stir method on this list. Wait, I misspelled it. Okay, interesting. So when I call the stir method on a list, I get back a representation of that list. You can see the representation of the list is a string. You can see that it looks like a list. You can also see that it's not written out the way I wrote it. I actually deliberately added spaces here just to show you that if we ask a list object to show itself to us, that is, to show us what it looks like, we call the stir method on that object. And that's what we're getting when we say x.stir. We're saying list.stir. Let's see what the object looks like when we want to view it as a string. So let's look at what happens when we do that with this do object. Now, do doesn't define stir. And so the question may come up, how can we call the stir method if we haven't defined it in the class? Normally, we would say something like def stir, right? That's what we would normally do. And in fact, we're about to do that. But the big question is, how can we be calling the stir method without having defined it? And the answer lies in inheritance. As we mentioned earlier, every object inherits from every class inherits from the object class one way or another, whether it's by inheriting from object directly and by default, like parent does. You see, parent inherits from object. We didn't define that in parent, but it inherits from object automatically. Or if the class inherits from a class that does inherit from object, one way or another, every class will end up inheriting from object. And the next thing we looked at was that the stir attribute, and that's a method, the stir method is actually part of object. Object actually defines a stir method, and this is the reason that we can call stir from a class that doesn't define it. It inherits from object. Do inherits from object. So we can say inherits from object and thus has access to stir and the other attributes defined in the object class. So we can call stir if we wish. Now, we can also define what will happen when we call stir. And in fact, we would like to show you now, I want to show you that in actual fact, we don't normally call stir directly at all. We actually invoke it indirectly. I mentioned to you in class, and we'll have to say it again, that anytime you see these double underscores, it means what we call a magic method. A magic method. A magic method. The reason it's called magic is because it's invoked implicitly or indirectly, as if by magic. How do we actually invoke stir? We can print the object. If we print the object or convert it to string, we're going to see this result. So what stir does is, as I said, it's designed to show us what an object looks like to a human. What would make sense to us? We can invoke this method, as I mentioned, by just printing the object. That'll cause Python to convert that object to a string in order to display it, and in so doing calls the stir method. We also have established that even though the stir method isn't defined in do, it's getting called anyway because do inherits from object, and object has a stir method. However, we can define our own stir method, and we can determine what the object will show to us when it's printed. We need to return a string. And whatever it is we return, that's what's going to be displayed when we print the object. So you can see there's a way for us to design our class in such a way that when someone prints our object, the way we've done with everything, we've printed strings, we printed lists, we printed all objects. When we print this object, this new object that we created, we're going to see some other message, whatever we'd like. This is a do object, for example. Now this relates directly to the homework, because in the homework I'm going to ask you to do this. In the homework I'm going to ask you to define a stir method, and when you print that object we're going to want to see some message that indicates what the object is. I guess I only have it in the discussion right now. But when you print the object, you should see this. Now, how does this string get created? Well, you're going to create it using the attributes from the object. And you'll see how you'll have access to the brand and sale price in a few minutes. But this part of the homework is accomplished by defining a stir method. And defining a stir method is as simple as just saying def stir. Make sure to put in self, and then whatever string you return, that is what you'll see when you print the object.